That's radar people that on the base. They didn't have any aircraft in the area at the time, and so we called it down to the air defense people at Los Angeles Air Defense Sector, and the director down there decided he got to call around his sites, and at one point in time they had at least 4 different radar sites that were getting radar returns on these things. And then all of a sudden there's like 3 more objects, and they had similar characteristics as far as the lighting is concerned, but these 3 stayed like together. They stayed like I don't know if they were formation or what it was, but anyway, these 3 stayed together, and then they stayed there for a little bit, and then they moved down to the south of me and set there stationary a while. And then a little bit later on, there's 3 more appears, but these 3 are individual ones, and so at this point I had like 7 of them. This goes back and forth for I don't know, 2-3 hours, and they finally decided to scramble an aircraft on it to go up and take a look at it, and this was coordinated with the other higher headquarters, and I think NORAD was involved and everybody. Well, about 3 different times that night, he was able to, he'd say contact. And that contact means he had contact with something on his radar in the cockpit of the aircraft. But these objects played around there for the remainder of my ship, and they just disappeared into the atmosphere. I know a lot of things this was not. I know it was not a helicopter. I know it was not an airplane. I know it was not a balloon, a weather balloon or any other type of balloon. And I know it was no known aircraft flying object that we know of today or at that time. And it wasn't a laser show. It wasn't anything like that. But they could move real fast. They could move from the east. They could be to the east of my field, and in just a short period of time they could be to the west. They could probably go 30 or 40 miles in time you could snap your fingers twice. I mean, just fast.
Colonel Charles Brown is a career Air Force officer, a hero of World War II, and worked specifically in Project Grudge. This is a project which for many people didn't really exist, but it did. And his testimony not only proves its existence, but also he will state, and you will hear, how the project had definitive cases and evidence. Cases that involved ground radar, air visual, and ground visual all at the same time in the same event. And as he said, it doesn't get any better than that.
Basically because of my counterintelligence training and police work in an outfit called Office of Special Investigations. Since I had one of the few pilot-trained investigators, I ended up doing a lot of investigations of unusual aircraft accidents in which sabotage was suspected, and as a consequence became acquainted with some outstanding scientists, and worked with the Air Technical Intelligence Center on a project called Grudge. At that time, Office of Special Investigations was a worldwide investigative unit in the Air Force, and were given the responsibility of investigating what became known as unidentified flying objects. And my job was to hand carry these reports over to the technical center and coordinate them with the project officer, answer any questions from an investigative viewpoint that I could assist on. Some of the objects reported were tracked on radar. We had objects with 4-way confirmation: ground visual, ground radar; airborne visual, airborne radar. And so far as I'm concerned, it don't get no better than that. I do remember speeds in excess of 4,000 to 5,000 miles an hour, which were far in excess of any known aircraft that we had or any of the enemies. There's no question, I've seen radar photographs of organized flights of unidentified objects, balls of light, if you will. And these were on radar, ground, visual, ground radar, airborne visual, airborne radar. Now the airborne visual, strangely enough, by the time they get a couple of fighters down there, those things apparently disappeared whenever they wanted to.
Mr. John Callahan is a senior FAA official. He was third or fourth down from the top of the FAA underneath Admiral Ingram at the time in 1986 that a major UFO event happened over Alaska. He will state that these objects were indeed on radar, that they were tracked moving in extraordinary nonlinear fashion and at speeds unattainable by any conventional propulsion system, and that the CIA, at a meeting with the admiral who headed up the FAA and the science advisors for President Reagan, at the end of the briefing, took all the evidence and said, quote, "This meeting never happened, this event never happened, and we were never here." I wish to emphasize that John Callahan is one of those senior government officials that people are always asking about. Where are they? Why don't they come forward? Well, Mr. Callahan has come forward, and his testimony is definitive. In addition to John Callahan's testimony, we have an enormous amount of material which he had kept from his days at the FAA as a senior official there. These include the pilot's report of the encounter, the actual videotape of the radar tracings, the FAA report which was generated, and transcripts of the air traffic controller talking to the Japan Airlines 747 captain, a military pilot, as well as subsequently a United Airlines pilot.
The way it started is there was a 747, a Japanese airline, 747 was coming from the northwest going across the Alaskan territory. And he was at either 31, 33, or 35,000 feet. And it was, I want to say around 11 o'clock at night, but you can check the real times. He called and asked the controller if the controller had any traffic at his altitude. And the controller said no. Basically, it was a midnight operation. They didn't have too much traffic. And he said, well, something like I have a target at my 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock position, about 8 miles. Now, in the 747, they have radar in the nose that picks up the weather outside there. So his radar is picking up a target. He sees this target with his eye, and the target, the way he described it, was a huge ball with lights running around it, and I think he said it was like 4 times as big as a 747. Well, when they read the reports that come through, the FAA has to protect themselves, so you can't say you saw a target, even though this is what he said. So they made him change his report to position symbols, which makes it sound like it wasn't really a target. The military controller has what they call height-finding radar, and they have long-range radar and short-range radar. So if they don't catch it on one of their systems, they catch it on the other. And if you listen to the military man, at one time he said, I have it on the height radar, or my range radar, whatever he called it, which indicated that he had a target on his system. The Japanese pilot would say he's now at 11 o'clock, he's now at 1 o'clock, he's now at 3 o'clock, he was bouncing around, this guy here, and when he would say that, the military guy would cut in and say he's now at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, and he would confirm the position. So it would go from 1 o'clock, 7 or 8 miles, to 6, 7 o'clock, 7 or 8 miles inside of 4 or 5 seconds. You have to be moving pretty quickly. When it was all done, and we went back to Washington the next day, the administrator had called down and wanted to know if he had a problem or not. And my boss had told him, well, we took a video of it, and it looks like there might have been something there. The administrator, which was Ingen at the time, Admiral Ingen, he said, well, have you got that video with you? Can you show me the video? And I said, yeah, and you just plug it in and play it. So we plugged it in for him. He started watching it, and after about 5 minutes, he told the staff, I canceled my, he had a meeting with someone in 15 minutes. He says, first he said, I'll be late, and then next it was cancel, and then I'm going to be here till this is over. So he watched the whole thing just over half an hour. A few minutes later, the Admiral calls down and says, I set up a briefing tomorrow morning at 9 or 10 o'clock, what it was. In the round room, bring all the stuff you have, bring everybody up there, and give them whatever they want. And we want to get out of it, just let them do whatever they want to do with it. They brought in 3 people from the FBI, 3 people from the CIA, and 3 people from Reagan's scientific study team, and I don't know who the rest of the people were. But they were all excited. When they got done, they actually swore all these other guys into that this never took place. We never had this meeting, and this was never recorded. He said this is the first time they ever had 30 minutes of radar data on a UFO, and they're all itching to get their hands into the data and to find out what it is and what really goes. And if they come out and told the American public that they ran into a UFO out there, it would cause panic across the country, so therefore you can't talk about it. And they're taking all this data. So I said, okay, take all that data, if that's what you want. But they took only what we had there. They didn't ask me if there was anything else that I had. They said they're taking all this data. And I said, fine. Now I had the original video that I took, and I had the pilot's report that came through, the first report, and I had the FAA's first report that was all downstairs on my table. They didn't ask for that, so I didn't give it to them. When they asked me what I thought, I told them that it looked like we had a UFO that was up there. The reason it wasn't on the FAA's tapes was because it was too large of an aircraft, and it was picked up as weather, so we wouldn't record it. That the pilot, the Japanese pilot, seen it. The Japanese pilot drew pictures of it. Eventually, they gave the Japanese pilot a hard time because of what he said he was embarrassing his country. Our military controllers said they seen it. Our FAA controllers said they seen it. Our FAA controllers, after a period of time, came back and said they really didn't see a target. They saw something else, which makes it sound like somebody is helping them fill out their reports, and therefore that looks suspicious. My guess is, because of the way it was, it's not part of the military's operation anymore, that it was a UFO. But who do you tell that you were involved in a UFO incident without them looking at you like you ain't wrapped too tight?
Captain Kenju Teruchi was piloting a Boeing 747, Japan Airlines, from Paris, France to Tokyo over the polar route. And I interviewed him by phone. I'm the only civilian to interview this gentleman, after he and his crew had a major sighting over northern Alaska on their way to Anchorage to land for refueling. And as a result of his following the rules, which he did, making a report out, landing safely, delivering the cargo, being a good pilot, Japan Airlines asked him to not fly anymore. I have over 3,000 cases now. A certain proportion are certainly historical that I've not interviewed myself, because in some of them they're so old I wasn't even alive. I wasn't born yet. And many of them come from Project Blue Book, which is the official Air Force study of the subject. And I would say in half of the cases at least, the phenomenon appears to approach the airplane, not the other way around. It's as if the aircraft is the focus of attention or curiosity, if I may use that word, of the phenomenon. That the pilot's flying along, minding his own business, and something comes up alongside one wing for 15 minutes at cruise altitude, cruise speed, and then sometimes we'll flip over to the other wing or stay right at the nose of the aircraft and then do barrel rolls along the flight axis. Some very interesting maneuvers.